We're going to talk and wrap up today before we get to some open Q&A from you. It looks like we'll have plenty of time and wrap up a little earlier, which is a blessing. We're going to talk about what is going on at the South Carolina State House. I know the news cycle is dominated 95% by the dumpster fire that's sitting in the Oval Office. And one terrible thing after another that's occurring, and we could talk about that all day. But I promised you last month that this year we're going to focus at the local level, because it was the local legislators that ultimately paved the way and allowed for this administration to take over again. I'm not going to go through the whole history, but it was the local level that paved that way. So there's a couple of key things that have been happening in South Carolina that requires our attention. Number one, school vouchers. This seems to be the topic they bring up time and time again. They've tried it, they've passed it, taken away our state money, our taxpayer dollars, to offset the costs of private and for-profit and religious schools in our state. Our taxpayer dollars. They passed it last year. It went to the state Supreme Court, and actually to the surprise of quite a few, the state Supreme Court says, hey, guys, come here. You see this Constitution of our state? You see this line right here that says, no public money shall go to private schools? It says it in the Constitution. Can't do it. They struck it down. Well, one thing you got to say about the Republicans is that they're persistent. When they got an idea in their head, they're not going to let it go. So they've done two things. One, they've changed the Supreme Court. All right. One of the key opponents of this measure was Justice Donald Beatty, who hit a mandatory retirement age, and that was his final decision in a 3-2 vote, by the way. His final decision was to vote and strike down this school voucher bill. Two other justices said yes, by the way. They've replaced him with a very conservative justice, of course. So if that same law had gone through, it probably would have gotten 3-2 in favor of it, but as it is, it was struck down. So they've gone back to the drawing board again, and now they've had a school voucher program, part 3 or 4. I don't know how many times they've tried this, but this time they say, okay, we won't take money from the general funds. Instead, we're going to take money from, who knows, the state lottery. Some of you may have been in this state long enough to remember having voted on whether we should have a state lottery. Who remembers that? All right, okay, so it wasn't so long ago. Lane, you must have only been 10 years old at the time. Okay, but anyhow, that money has been funding our colleges, both public and private, in terms of scholarships. There's the Hope Scholarship, there's the Trust Scholarship, there's the Palmetto Fund Scholarship, using lottery money to provide money to go to higher ed. And that apparently was okay. So they thought to themselves, well, maybe we can use the lottery money instead and go to school vouchers for K through 12 private education. And that's their latest path. We do have people fighting against it. I'm going to play a couple minutes worth of clips from a committee hearing in which Senator Brad Hutto from Orangeburg asked all the right questions. So I want you to hear what all the objections are, all the problems are with this proposal.
I recognize that this is a bill that many people want to move forward quickly, but I think it's one that ought to be studied in a little more detail than it seems like we're doing, because it seems like this is on track to be debated right away. I'm concerned that we're not getting public input, that we're trying to rush it to the floor when there are things in here that I guess we will discuss, but what the poverty guidelines are going to be used, the open-ended nature of it, where this funding is going to come from, as we know that the lottery dollars continue to dwindle. What really concerns me overall is that we supposedly live under the Constitution of the state of South Carolina, which says that no public funds will be spent for private education. And if there's a desire to change that, let's do the right thing and put it to the voters. And if the voters agree with that, If they think that that's a wise use of public money, let's change the Constitution. We've already gone up to the Supreme Court twice, and both times they've said you can't use public dollars. And so we are clearly violating the Constitution, in my opinion, and I realize I'm not on the court. But we could avoid this whole idea of whether we're violating the Constitution or not by changing the Constitution. But you know, as well as I do, it won't pass because this is not what the people want. It would not get enough votes. If you ask the average taxpayer, do you want your tax dollars to go to pay to send fairly wealthy families' children to private school? Because that's what's going to happen. There are no private schools in rural South Carolina. A lot of places where schools are not doing as well, there's no private school option. What this is going to be used is to allow people who already are sending their children to private school to get a subsidy that, quite frankly, they don't need. They've planned for and decided to send their child to private school, and I got no problem with that. We have significant needs in the public schools of South Carolina. And I'll tell you, in rural areas, and some of the children that go into classes in some of the rural areas and schools that were built in the 30s and 40s and leaking roofs and all other things that need to be fixed. They don't have the up-to-date internet connections and smart boards and everything else that the children in Summerville and Greenville have. But we're getting there.
All right.
But we could get there a lot faster if we weren't taking this money out of the budget and subsidizing people who do not need the money and put it into the public schools. What do you say to that?
1,000. I mean, you know, that's another thing to kind of think about the 15,000 out of 750,000 students. I forgot the percentage, but it's a really small program.
You sort of make my point that I wish we were talking about things that would affect the 750,000 and the needs they have and the challenges they have rather than focus on this 15,000 who probably, many of them aren't facing these challenges because they come from relatively well-to-do families.
Yeah, Brad Hutto is a fighter. Others have raised the same objections. And the thing that they've also done, not only are they taking money from the lottery fund, they've also raised the minimum family income level. Remember, this was initially pitched 2 years ago as, let's help the poor students get out of bad schools. Let's help those that are at the poverty level. Now the poverty level is any family making $200,000 a year or less. That's the new poverty level that this new law will have, which, by the way, applies to 99% of families in South Carolina. So this is truly a diversion of funds from bucket A to bucket B. It is no longer a pretense that it's about needy families. It's about creating a source of revenue for ideological, religious, and private schools that will make money off of this, as well as indoctrinate students, as well as discriminate against the students they don't even want to admit. They don't have to adhere to disabilities. They don't have to provide services for the children with autism. They don't have to do any of that stuff that public schools have to do, yet they get to take our tax money. So where does this stand? Well, this passed the Senate. And as we talked last time, there's a process. It's submitted. It goes through committees, discussions. Got to pass the committee, then it goes to the Senate or the House, depending on where it originated, gets voted on there. Then the other chamber has to go through the same process. We are only in the 4th week of session, and this law has already passed the Senate. Normally, it can take 2 years for it to reach this point, but they bypassed public comment. They bypassed the ability for people to come in and testify. They ignored it because the Republican supermajority can do whatever the hell it wants. It can enforce its rules and practices. It can dispose of them. And in this case, they rushed this through without any of the normal processes that everything else goes through. So it's got to go through the House. The House has its version. They haven't taken it up yet, but there's probably no doubt that they're going to rush it just as fast, and then they're going to send it off to the governor to sign. And I will tell you this, my personal opinion, this will become law. No amount of phone calls, no amount of letters to the editor is going to change this fact. The only thing we can do is make them uncomfortable for doing this. And then showing everybody the repercussions should this pass, and let's say it passes the Supreme Court, because it will get challenged a third time. Assuming it's passed even then, we can start to highlight the devastation that's happening to our public school system, and how the already well-off who are sending their kids to these private schools are using our tax dollars now instead of their personal dollars. It now becomes a free-for-all. So anyhow, that was one of the biggest things that's happened in the state in recent weeks. The other big thing that's happened, and you may have heard a little bit about it, is a mystery $1.8 billion. Who here have heard of this? Do any of you know where the $1.8 billion is? Anybody got a lockbox somewhere, closet? You know where it went? So here's the short of it. Early last year, around March time frame, somebody raised a little bit of concern saying, hey, we're looking at the books here, and there's this account with $1.8 billion in it, and nobody knows where it came from, what it's for, how we could use it, or if it's even there. So questions were raised. So the treasurer was hauled in front of both Senate and House, and they grilled him, and he's combative. I mean, this guy here, Curtis Loftus, he's Mr. MAGA treasurer. Like, he's all about the libs and woke and not wanting to invest in woke and all that. He doesn't even have an accounting background. He's all about the woke. Anyhow, they hauled him and said, dude, what's going on with this $1.8 billion? And he got combative. He was yelling at them. There was screaming going on. This is between Republican lawmakers and this guy going at each other. Governor McMaster ran interference, protected this guy, and said, what I'm going to do is we're going to hire some auditors. So several $1 million later spent on forensic auditors, a group called Alexis Partners. They came in for 6-7 months, did a deep dive, interviewed hundreds of people, looked at all the books, looked at all the systems, and they came back with the story. They said, here's the story. Almost 10 years ago, 8 years ago, they transferred from one accounting software system to a new accounting software system. And anytime you do a software upgrade, it's tough. I know, that's my life. That's the world I live in. And they went through it, and they said, South Carolina actually did a really good job, because these things are hard, but the process went, and hard work went, and it went smoothly, except for one account that they kind of messed up. And they did things kind of not according to standard accounting practices, and next thing you know, there's $1.8 billion being recorded in the books of this one account. And there's 3 different groups of people that knew about this, that signed off on it when they submitted the budget and the reports to the lawmakers. You had the state treasurer. You have the state comptroller. You guys ever vote on the comptroller at the elections and wonder, what the hell does this guy do? Vote, right? Nobody knows what a comptroller does, but it's an elected position. And then the third is an appointed state auditor. Those 3 parties are there to validate the books. Well, once these irregularities started happening, first it was a double reporting of some lottery money. Something weird happened in the books, and the controller resigned. His name was Richard Ekstrom. He resigned in disgrace last year, said, listen, I'm not good at this job. I'm out of here. 2 weeks ago, the state auditor, once this all came to light and this report went out, guess what he did? He resigned. He's like, listen, I'm no good at this job. I'm out of here. Guess who's remaining and fighting strong? This guy, Loftus. He's standing firm, saying, I didn't do anything wrong. And so basically, Alexis Partners says, this money doesn't exist. This was purely an accounting error. This money, they typed it into the system, never was real money, never was nothing. Just poof. Now, it doesn't cause any harm to our budget because that was never part of money that we could spend. It was a mystery account, so it doesn't impact our budget, but it can impact our credit rating, the state's ability to borrow money. Because once you've got bad books, Well, let me ask you, if you file your taxes incorrectly, what happens to you? Yeah, some of you actually know. You're screwed. Takes a while to build that up, or you miss a payment on a bill, your credit rating is sunk. Well, that's what the state is facing. We are now under investigation by the SEC at the federal level. Although with Trump in charge, he may just make that disappear because McMaster's a friend, so who knows. But in any event, there are some bad things that happened. I'm going to play another clip because there's a little more to this story that makes this guy more than just incompetent, but made him a liar. And what do you call it when you lie under sworn testimony? Perjury. He is a perjurer. So we're going to watch this little clip and hear about how Loftus had perjured himself.
And so in the last 24 hours, as I've learned that apparently these monies never existed. And that stands in opposition, if correct, to things that we've been told in the past. And so I just want to make sure that I haven't confused anything here. And so I'd like to offer to you some comments that I had taken to heart and shared with my neighbors and constituents about our situation over the last year or so. And by that end, I mean, on March 6th of 2024, in an interview with Fox Carolina News, State Treasurer Curtis Loftus had said that the $1.8 billion was invested, and quote, "We've made $194 million off of that money. It wasn't forgotten," end quote. Is that statement consistent with your findings?
We understand if you look at the 1.8 billion itself, that particular 1.8 billion could not be invested because 1.6 of it was not invested. We do understand that the STO cash and investments that were in the custody of the treasurer and the treasurer's office were invested along their normal business practices.
So, do I understand you correctly to say that the suggestion that, or excuse me, not the suggestion, the affirmative statement that the state had made $194 million off of that money is inaccurate?
I don't think we can trace a specific amount. I believe that was done as more of a calculation based upon the results of the other cash that's sitting in STO Treasury.
Okay. But you didn't find any evidence of a return on the phantom money, did you?
No, our scope was limited to cash investments, but not the income on those investments. But to Susan's point, I think, from our view, we don't see how the 1.6 billion could have been invested given the origins of where it came from and not being real cash.
Senator Young had referenced the 1.8 and said, quote, "You had mentioned, you being Senator Loftus, or excuse me, Treasurer Loftus here, you had mentioned that this money has earned interest," to which the treasurer had responded, quote, "Yes, sir," end quote. Senator Young then stated, quote, "And earlier today you told us that the money had earned about $225 million, end quote." And Treasurer Loftus responded, quote, "Yes, sir," end quote. Senator Young followed up and said, quote, "And is that over the course of the 7 years?" To which the treasurer responded, "Yes, sir." Senator Young then asked, quote, "And how do you know that?" The treasurer responded, quote, "It is invested in the pool and we took the lowest daily rate and computed that, just ran the spreadsheets," end quote. Is there any way that the $1.6 billion could have earned $225 million through investment?
I don't believe there's any way that it could have earned any money on those investments or on that balance because it does not represent real cash.
Alas, a source of vexation for us.
That was House Representative Mike Akaski, who really just cut to the chase. And basically, Curtis Loftus in testimony said that they've earned money on this $1.8 billion. And these auditors, it's like going to the dentist and pulling out a wisdom tooth to get this answer out of them. But they didn't want to come across as partisan or political. But basically, the answer was, I don't see how we could have earned interest on cash that didn't even exist. So basically that Curtis Loftus is not only bad at his job, but lied to cover it up. And therefore we have articles of impeachment filed in the House by Representative Heather Bauer and also by Senator Ed Sutton. Both Democrats have filed this. Why is it that only Democrats feel like lying at a Senate testimony and being bad at your job should be a problem is beyond me. And right now, the Republicans are really just keeping quiet. Most of them are. A few are getting loud, but most are just keeping quiet and giving him the cover. Curtis Loftus says he's staying in his role until his term is up in 2 years. Does this look like a merit-based hire to you, ladies and gentlemen? Just asking. George, you have a question? I think it is a mixture of both. I think not being that bright got him into the mess, and then he lied to cover it up. MAGA math. Thank you, George. All right. So let me wrap up. I'm going to talk about what our local lawmakers are up to. So we have local senator, we have 2 local House representatives, and I just want to run through quickly the list of legislations that they have sponsored. Doesn't mean they wrote every word of it, but they felt strongly enough about it. Remember, there's over 1,000 bills that have now been filed that are sitting in this legislative cycle. And these are the ones that our local lawmakers have signed on to as their priority. And so I want you to look for patterns. I want you to see what their priorities are and match that against what we think our priorities, not just Democrats, but Greenwoodians, what our priorities should be. So let's start with Senator Billy Garrett. He has sponsored quite a few bills. Here's the list. One involving AI, child abuse, creating fake images, etc. Morphed images of children, faked images out there. He's put out signed on for a law against that. A law about mandating disclosure of electronic records. A law about creating a safe haven and easy adoption for abandoned babies. A law to fund and put school chaplains in every district, every school district in the state. He has a law to create as a major penalty fentanyl-induced homicide. So if you gave fentanyl to somebody and they died, you could be charged with homicide. A law against organized retail crime. That's kind of the new thing among Republicans. They see a video of a mob smash and grab at a retail store somewhere, and so now that becomes kind of a disguised, in my opinion, a disguised racist attack, because it's always in urban areas and it's kind of underscoring a certain narrative. But whatever, stealing is a crime, so let them have this one. Non-opioid pain management, where the state will have a list of certified drugs that are non-opioids for pain. Medicinal marijuana will not be one of those state-endorsed paths, so they're going to have a list of other drugs that are for it. Vital statistics, he's getting involved in how somebody can change a gender on a driver's license and birth certificates. Something about regrooved and regroovable tires is a priority. Drug-induced homicide, just like the fentanyl one. Something to clarify the duties of the Attorney General. And then something about an electronic nicotine delivery system regulation. If you are a vapor, we want to be able to regulate that in our state. These are, of the hundreds of bills in the Senate, these are the ones that are Senator Billy Garrett's priorities. So he's got sponsored 13 bills, none of which have passed, but it's early on, right? No bills have passed to the governors yet. There's still many, many more months, if not years, to go. But we'll be tracking this, and we'll also be putting up a web page shortly that will allow you to go and track this as well to see where are our local lawmakers at with their sponsored bills. All right, next up is a guy we hardly know because he's never around, and that's Representative Daniel Gibson. This is who Dr. Brooks ran against for State House District 12. So he was an initial sponsor of only one bill, but then he signed on to a bunch of others in the last couple of weeks. So see if you sense any pattern in Representative Gibson's bills. And by the way, there's over 900 bills in the House now. So of those 900, these are his priorities. Parental Rights in Education Act. That's the Mom for Liberties bill, by the way, where a parent can come in and dictate what a teacher can teach to their kid, be damned about school curriculum, be damned about all the other kids in the class. A Pregnancy Care Act to offer services to young mothers, to mandate health care to dependent mothers. We're talking teenage mothers and the mothers in their early 20s who are still dependent themselves on their parents. A law against obscene visual representations of child sexual abuse, sexual exploitation of a minor with morphed images, unlawful dissemination of sexually explicit materials. What is on his mind? He is really, really focused on this. A law against chemically induced abortions, a law about child welfare and biological sex, meaning banning any type of gender-affirming doctor-approved care and parent-approved care, a parental bill of rights, again, involving genders. He's got a law against DEI in state universities, having open enrollment in public schools, just some timing there. He wants to display the 10 Commandments, make it mandatory in all public schools. South Carolina Dependent Maternity Coverage Act, again, young pregnant women. Baby Olivia Act, he wants a law that mandates that in health classes, in public schools across our state, that part of the curriculum be showing ultrasound images of fetuses and all that 9 yards. Basically, they want to make their anti-abortion propaganda part of the school healthcare curriculum. Student Physical Privacy, which is a bathroom bill. Farmer Protection Act, Marriage Tax Penalty Act. Defense of Children's Innocence Act, banning any type of drag performances. So if you happen to have somebody dressed up, a man dressed up in woman's clothing reading a book, at a children's library, that would be banned, because apparently it is very scary to see a man, wearing a blouse or something like that. It's just absolutely terrifying. Human Life Protection Act, and then Small Estates, another Pregnancy Act, another act about biological sexes, another act about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then finally an act to implement party registration and locking the primaries down to just those registered party participants, which means the open primaries that we have had for so long go away. These are the priorities of Daniel Gibson. Can you name for me how many of those affect poverty in South Carolina? How many of those affect health care and access to health care? How many of those affect prices and making life affordable, or housing affordable, or cars affordable, or energy prices affordable? Any of the real world issues that face, and I'm not just talking Democrats, everybody could be benefiting from laws, none of which the ones that Daniel Gibson sponsors impact. He is, again, purely there for extreme partisan purposes. That's all he's interested in. They are not interested in governing. They are interested in morality and imposing their beliefs on the rest of you. So he is currently a named sponsor on 28 bills, none of which have passed because it's early. Guess who's next? I am going to show you some mercy. I ran out of time and energy. He's the sponsor on like 80 bills. And I was like, oh my God. But just know that everything that Daniel Gibson was on, he's on two, plus a whole bunch more. And I just didn't have the energy physically and mentally to go through them all. But we'll have them on our website. He has sponsored 67 bills, none of which have passed. But he is busy slapping his name on the same extremist propaganda bills that are out there, very few of which actually benefit you or I. Do you find this type of information useful? All right, good. We'll be diving deep into this, and as any of these bills that they sponsor make it to those next steps, we'll be sure to highlight those. I want us to watch, I want us to share, I want us to inform, and I want us to fight when it comes time again to run against these clowns in 2026, which is next year. Not far from now. All right.